thought I'd choose a shirt that Matt could probably hear. Daredevil, directed by Mark Steven Johnston. Originally released in February of 2003 with a runtime of 1 hour and 37 minutes. The director's cut was re-released with a runtime of 2 hours and 13 minutes. That's over half an hour of additional footage. Starring Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Colin Farrell, Michael Clarke Duncan, Jon Favreau, and Joe Pantoliano. Had a production budget of 78 million, domestic take of 102 million, foreign take of 76 million, for a worldwide total of 179 million. This resulting in a profit of $101 million. Also worth noting that while the director's cut adds an extra half an hour, around about 33 minutes to the movie actually, they also cut a whole scene out to expand on the story as well. So you're actually getting about 40 minutes worth of extra footage in here. So let's have a look at these characters. We'll start with Matt Murdock / Daredevil. Ben Affleck does pretty well as Matt Murdock. He's your witty, somewhat charming lawyer, out to do the right thing, out to do the best he can. Although you get the feeling in this version of the story that he is much more interested in being Daredevil than he is being in Matt Murdock. As for Daredevil, he's your gritty midnight crime fighter. He's athletic, he's tough, he's fast. Hits hard, can take a hit. His heightened senses give him that superhuman edge, and he uses it a lot. I suppose he has to use it a lot, he is blind otherwise. Now this version of Daredevil, he's also quite willing to kill people. So there's a little less Spider-Man and a little more Punisher in this version. Looks the part, acts the part, presents well all around. Then you've got Favreau as Foggy. It was really weird seeing him as Foggy again. I still think of him as Happy Hogan. So that took a little bit of adjusting. Foggy is your loyal and capable partner in the law firm. Good at what he does, a little bit more business-minded, a little less altruistic. Definitely wants more than pro bono cases. Definitely more interested in the big fish and the big dollars. But still a good guy at heart, and does provide some of the comic relief in the movie. Thankfully they don't lean into that too heavily, and in the director's cut they give him a lot more to do. He's much more intrinsic to the story this time around. And now Elektra. This is a much more subdued Elektra. This is not the assassin from the comic books. This is before she has that particularly bloodthirsty career. She's your privileged, wealthy elite. Daddy's little girl, slightly rebellious, but generally a nice person. As I said, this is the pre-assassin stage of Elektra, so while she's good at fighting, she's not great at fighting. She could probably take on and beat up most any normal opponent, but the opponent she has in this movie is not normal and outclass her quite badly. Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Whilst the Netflix series version is a masterpiece of character work, Michael Clarke Duncan cannot be matched for raw physicality. Dude is a unit, an absolute beast. They make him out to be the top dog of underworld crime, and that's fair enough. You never really see much of that. He does a lot of strutting, a lot of posing, a lot of threatening, a lot of executing henchmen. You never really see the business side of him, but that's okay. You've only got so much time. And Michael Clarke Duncan just fills a room, both with his size and his voice. Colin Farrell as Bullseye. Okay, a very campy, threatening menace. He's a scary dude. They waste no time setting him up as a psycho. You're annoying him, you're dead. Farrell appears to be all in on this guy too. It's fun to watch. He is such a comic book villain. A definitive comic book villain, this guy. He tears through his targets and messes up the heroes without much hassle. Without Daredevil being smart about it, Bullseye would have won. As for everybody else, we've got Ben Urich, the reporter. Not a bad version, quite enjoy this guy. And in the director's cut, he's got quite a bit more to do with the overall story. Wesley, Kingpin's right-hand man, again, much more to do. Detective Nick Manolis, running around trying to catch Daredevil, trying to catch Kingpin, trying to stop all crime, also has a lot more to do in this movie. Karen Page makes an appearance, played by Ellen Pompion. She's gone from one basic scene to two basic scenes. However, the second basic scene is a case breaker, so that was very cool. Ellen also looks slightly familiar to me, and it turns out she played Meredith Grey in Grey's Anatomy. It's kind of weird because I've never watched Grey's Anatomy. Kevin Smith playing a forensics guy called Jack Kirby. Yeah, comics in joke. Woo! Also, Coolio playing Jackson. A much more expanded role in the director's cut. His whole legal case ends up being intrinsic to the overall plot. In fact, everything links back to the Kingpin because of him. And lastly, Eric Avari playing Nicholas Nachios. Always love seeing this character pop up in movies. It's just always great value. Also worth noting, Scott Terra playing young Matthew Murdock and David Keith playing Jack Murdock. Both deliver very well which is a good thing because the backstory is quite important. So for characters, look, I enjoyed all of them. There were no real weak entries in this one. This director's cut reinforced all the main characters and gave all the sub-characters something else to do. Heck, even Karen Page and the detective contributed to this movie. So characters get an easy 3. Good time all around. On to the story, the part of the movie that benefited the most from the extra half hour of work. Makes a huge difference with what they cut out and what they put in. But it's the same old origin. Young kid, father's a washed out boxer. Father begins to stage a comeback, fighting his way back to the top, ends up getting murdered for refusing to throw a match, inspiring the young kid to become a lawyer and seek justice and vengeance. That kid just happens to be blind due to a chemical spill accident and have super hearing and other super senses. Now, a big part of the first act is a flashback to young Matt Murdock's life. How it all happened, how he trains, how he becomes who he is. We then get a demonstration of the Daredevil in action. Big old punch up followed by the death, or execution, really, of the bad guy in question. All that's pretty cool, gives you a solid feel for the character and the world that he lives in. This includes a suit up sequence, which gives you flashbacks to the Commando and Batman. It's pretty cheesy. After this, the story moves on to a murder mystery. A prostitute has been murdered. Jackson has been accused of this and is fighting for his innocence. Matt and Foggy take on the case because Daredevil can tell that Jackson is actually telling the truth. He didn't kill her. Now this case connects into another case, which connects back into the Kingpin mystery. And all the legal goings on melded together quite nicely. We get to see Matt Murdock using his heightened senses as a bit of a detective as well, which was very cool. I'm so glad they put this into the movie. Now on the other side of things, you have the Kingpin making a move against Elektra's dad. He wants out of the crime empire. He needs to get away. Kingpin isn't so keen on this and has him killed off, bringing in Bullseye. Bullseye does the job but makes it look like Daredevil killed him. Now this makes things complicated since Matt and Elektra are getting along very, very well. Elektra swears vengeance, has her own little training montage, suits up and goes off to kill Daredevil. Daredevil goes out to meet her, I assume, or something. You never really find that bit out. And Bullseye heads off to the rooftops to fight both of them. Stabby, stabby, punchy, punchy. Elektra is sadly murdered. Straight out of the comics, and it upset people back then too. Daredevil, quite beat up from fighting Elektra, swears vengeance on Bullseye, and now they have a punch-up. One brawl in the church later, Daredevil wins. Bullseye's on the pavement. Daredevil, quite beat up, but survives. Having figured out that Kingpin's behind everything, Matt races off to fight him too. Wounded, of course. Now the interesting part is while all this is happening, you've got the subplot coming into fruition, where everything else has been linking back to Wesley, which then links back to Kingpin. See, what you end up with is Karen Page and Foggy figuring this out, calling Ben Urich, who then contacts the detective, and the detective arrests Wesley. It all ties in really well. Actually makes sense as to why the police are suddenly turning up at the Kingpin's place at the end of the fight between him and Daredevil. Oh, incidentally, Daredevil wins that fight too. No surprise there. It's amazing how much the story benefits from the director's cut. The story's gone from fairly choppy and disjointed to a much more flowing piece of work. It makes much more sense. It connects better. All the connective tissue has been put back in. Really. I don't know why they cut this stuff out. This is good. Mind you, what was cut out in this version is the really pointless love scene between Elektra and Matt. In the theatrical release, Matt and Elektra are making out on a rooftop in the rain. Matt hears a woman screaming for help. He ignores her and goes off to bed with Elektra. In this version, it's almost an alternate reality, where Matt goes, no, walks away from Elektra and goes to find out what's going on with the murdered woman. That's not just an extra scene, that's a major scene change. That is a significant difference in a character's story arc. I mean, you know that a director's cut's going to change some things, but I wasn't expecting that level of change. Doesn't plug all the gaps, I must admit. I mean, how Daredevil knew to find Elektra on that rooftop, how Elektra knew to go looking for Daredevil on that rooftop, and how Bullseye knew that either of them were going to be on the rooftop at all is still a bit of comic book silliness. But alright, you know. As a result of all this, the story for this movie, I'm going to score it a 3.5. It is so much better than the theatrical release. It fixes so many problems. I mean, I'm sure the studio had their reasons. They had whatever market research, whatever the board of directors, or whatever someone said to someone as to why they made the changes they did. But looking at this, looking at what this does for the story, what this does for the movie, how it improves it, You gotta wonder why. Anyway, that's a rant for some other time, I'd say. So yeah, story, 3.5. Look and feel. Well, there's one thing consistent with Daredevil stuff. Comic books, TV shows, movies, whatever it happens to be. It's dark, there's various shades of red, and it's regularly raining. As I mentioned, the lighting in this is quite well done. Lots of reflections, lots of shadows, lots of dark muted colours, plays with the themes of a city at night. Generally speaking, the movie's quite well shot. Doesn't jar you in or out, doesn't throw you off, doesn't have weird angles at weird times. Strong use of Catholic iconography as appropriate to the scene and the setting. Wouldn't be Daredevil without that. And of course the special effects representing his sonar vision. I quite like the way they did that. It's very, very effective. It's much more defined and exact than the version in the Netflix series, and definitely used a lot more. It plays in particularly strongly when it comes to defeating the Kingpin, actually. Quite a few of the comic book shots, the classic sort of thing, are quite cheesy, quite dramatic, a little overdone. Wouldn't be the same without him, but you know, the zoom in on the face and the long shot and the snap to here and the shot over there and the posing and the silhouettes. Yeah, it's a bit silly. Some of the stunts, some of the flips, jumps and cartwheels felt a little zero-G, felt a little bit wire work on that. And the fight choreo, some of it's good. Some of it, look, not so much. Back in the day, I remember loving it. I remember thinking, this is amazing. Now you look at it and go, I honestly think Captain America 2 has spoiled me for fight choreo in any movie almost now. When Bullseye is actually swishing his jacket around and doing things, they have these sort of serpentine, almost rattlesnake noises in the background. Those audio cues for his movements and his actions were quite effective. Again, a little overdone, but it's the whole movie really, and it worked. Now, I can't remember if it was in the theatrical I can't recall if it was in the For someone who speaks as much as I do, you'd think I'd have an easier time with words, right? I can't recall if it's in the theatrical release, but when you see Matt walk into his wardrobe and it's his little bat cave, blind as a bat cave, and it's full of Daredevil suits and Daredevil weaponry and Daredevil gear. It's not just one suit that he has to patch up all the time. And the rest of his apartment honestly looks like, I suppose, the Batcave. Kind of vampire-esque in the look and feel of his place, because he doesn't need lights, does he? And he sleeps in a sarcophagus full of water because that dampens all the hearing, I suppose. Actually, yeah, I love the sarcophagus idea. I think that's very cool. I'm guessing that's why no one ever comes back to his apartment. Having to explain all that would be a trick. But on the whole, the look and feel is very nice. It is a good time. It suits the whole world that they've set up. Gets a little silly at times. Gets a little weird. But you know what? It also, like I said, matches everything else in this movie. It never really feels out of place for the world they're in. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3.25. If for no other reason than just the effort involved in some of these shots and some of the attention to comic book lore detail that go into in this movie is quite impressive. Script and dialogue. Okay, I remember the theatrical release being worse than this. And it definitely doesn't hurt that we get a lot more of Foggy and Matt bantering. These guys have a real good chemistry. They really play well off each other. It's a sort of cleverness that you just want to see more and more of. Now, Matt and Elektra, on the other hand, it's not as good. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not bad. It's just not as good. At the big dinner party, you've got a scene where it goes straight from Matt and Foggy, then the next thing is Matt and Elektra, and the difference is very obvious. Not jarring, doesn't pull you out, but it does feel like a step down. When Matt suits up, his dialogue drops again. It's not Catwoman level bad, but it's just not as good as it was, you know what I mean? He actually has a line where the bad guy goes, "What do you want?" He just goes, "Justice." If this was a more current movie, you'd swear they're ripping on Batman. Bullseye doesn't get many lines, but when he does, he's clearly unhinged. Especially when he demands a costume. No deep psychological reason, no heavy background story to it, just he wants a costume too, everyone else has one. I'd really like to see Colin Farrell in the comics accurate Bullseye costume. That'd just be hilariously awesome. Foggy and Jackson, the back and forth in the courtroom. Foggy desperately trying to control Jackson's mouth in court as Jackson just keeps digging himself in a hole. Also the way they demonstrate the downside to Daredevil's powers, his weakness to strong sound. And they make it a real weakness. It's just not a mild inconvenience. It's going to get him killed one day. It actually screws him up a few times in this movie. When a relentless psycho like Bullseye figures out your weakness, you have a bad time with that. All of Kingpin's lines are delivered with such a deep and weighty voice that it just makes them great, and you want to hear him say more. When you really think about it though, he doesn't really say much more than your standard villain type stuff. One of the more powerful moments in the movie is when Daredevil is beaten down on some mugger, some thug enforcer, and then he sees the little kid crying in the corner. And then he has to say to the little kid, no, I'm not the bad guy. And that obviously really affects Matt. The parallels between Matt's life now and Matt's life then. Well, that's not lost on Matt, and it's certainly not lost on the viewers. You can see him having a bit of a crisis there, a little bit of a moment of reflection on whether or not he's actually doing the right thing anymore. Then the stuff with Ben Urich and the stuff with the detective, and the back and forth between all the other characters, and the conversation with the priest. You know, all these things added up to a well-told story. If the story that they put back in is the replacement piece of cloth, then the dialogue and the script is the stitching that holds it in there. End of the day, script and dialogue is much better than I remember it being. And I remember really not liking this movie very much at all. I'll be giving this a 3.25. Fun factor. Yeah, I had fun. I had a good time with this. I think I was engrossed in seeing all the extra bits they put back in. The story was engaging. The action sequences was okay up to good. Whilst this doesn't hit the heights of the modern comic book movie experience, this is certainly so much better than the lame duck it was on release. It never pulled me out, it didn't let me down, it gave me more than I expected, and left me well entertained. I'll be giving this a 3.25. So, final score. We add these all together, and we get ourselves a 16.25. The director's cut is a vastly improved Daredevil experience. Not as good as the Netflix series in many ways, but in some cases, they do some things better. You don't have to wait a whole season to see the red suit, for example. You haven't seen the Daredevil movie until you've seen the director's cut version, and I do recommend it. Thanks for joining me. Hope you've had a good time. As usual, comment down below and let me know what you thought. Like, subscribe, share it around, and as always, have a great week and find some time to watch a movie.